The text for today got me thinking about baptism, this strange ritual we participate in as Christians. As if a few drops of tap water and a couple of choice words could actually change somebody's life. And yet, thousands of years later, here we are, still baptizing people. And it's not just something that devout churchgoers do. As you well know, we have people who come here to have their baby baptized, and then we never see them again. These families often don't attend church and may not even fully identify as Christians, and yet they come here longing for their child to have this blessing. Now, as many of you may know, I am the daughter of lapsed Catholics who have at best a contentious relationship with Christianity. But in my baby album, there are these pictures of me in a poofy little dress with a matching white crocheted sweater. While I never discussed my baptism with my parents, the photos led me to believe that at some point they got nostalgic and took me down to see the local priest. Even though we're not a religious family, having seen these photos, I trusted I had been baptized, and so as a teenager, when I would go and visit a friend's house for a sleepover and the family would go to church in the morning, I'd go with them and I'd take communion. Now fast forward a couple decades, and I'm talking to my mom about this incredible communion ritual I had participated in on a retreat. As I'm telling the story, she interrupts me and says, "But you can't take communion, Tamarra. You're not baptized." Huh? Well, it turns out my irreverent parents had borrowed my cousin's baptism gown for a photo shoot because they thought this would be cute. And now here I was in seminary, already well into discernment for ordination, having never participated in this basic Christian sacrament. Now, before I go any further with that story, I want to talk about a different experience that I had just this past week. Piper and I went to the Connecticut Science Center to see the Bodies Revealed exhibit. Have any others of you gone and seen this? A couple? Yeah. Well, for those of you who haven't, it's this fascinating and maybe arguably kind of creepy exhibit that uses actual human bodies that were donated for science. And the bodies are prepared using this polymer preservation technique, which acts kind of like a liquid silicone rubber. And then they position the bodies in a variety of ways, and they cut away so that you can see the layers of muscle and the bones and some of the organs. And then in separate cases, there are other organs, healthy organs, diseased organs on display. Well, as a former massage therapist, I love this sort of thing. It was actually my second time going and seeing this exhibit. And Piper is a huge dork and can be convinced into almost any educational activity, so I knew it wouldn't be a hard thing to get her on board. But I didn't imagine that this was going to be a super popular weekend activity. And yet when I got to the museum, the line was crazy. It snaked down 2 flights of stairs and across a lobby. And then after you got through that line, you got up to the exhibit hall, and there was a whole other line just to get in there. There were people of every age, from probably 5 or 6 years old all the way on up, every race and every shape and every size, and everybody was in line waiting to see these bodies. Once inside, we joined a throng of other curious viewers pressing around those display cases. At one case that held information about the endocrine system, we heard a couple of teenagers having a conversation. "Yeah, that's a thyroid. Yeah, my mom had to have hers removed. She's on full replacement. I didn't know that's what it looked like. It's like this weird, knobby bow tie or butterfly." And then at a different place, a family was gathered around a skeleton that had a replaced hip joint, talking about the father's upcoming surgery. And then there was this one case that I saw this group of older women gathered around, and they were there for quite some time. And I waited. And when they finally left, I realized it was a case that held a uterus and ovaries. And even though many of these women had probably been pregnant and even given birth, they had never actually been able to see what a uterus or ovaries look like, even though they carry them around in their bodies. I get mushy about these things, and so here I was in this very crowded exhibit, and I started tearing up. Because you see, we spend our entire lives in a body. We experience everything through this body: pain, pleasure, hunger, breath. Even our emotions are experienced somatically. We experience the tightness of sadness in our throat. Sometimes we experience rage in our jaw or in our gut. Desire tends to course through us like heat. And for me, longing seems to live somewhere in my chest. It's all happening right here inside this body. And yet, few of us really know what is happening inside our bodies at any given moment. We can't see into ourselves. We have to rely on outside professionals to explain how our bodies work to us. How crazy is that? And so when an exhibit like this comes to town, the lines snake down the block so that people have a chance to see themselves. And it's not just true with our bony, fleshy, physical forms, it's also true about our minds. We think we control our minds, and yet I would guess that everybody here has had that experience where you're in a really important conversation and you're supposed to be paying attention, and then you realize your mind left, and you're trying to listen for context clues of what might have just happened, and everybody's looking at you. Or maybe you've had one of those experiences where, without your permission, your mind starts focusing on something terrible, or scary, or gruesome. Or maybe it just focuses on something that you probably shouldn't be thinking about when you're sitting in church. The point is that we're having to wrangle this thing that is us, and yet it seems to have a mind of its own. Some of us read books about meditation and mindfulness, trying to learn how to control this part of ourselves. Other people talk to therapists or read self-help books, hoping that someone maybe can shed a little light on what the heck is going on up here. Again, we can't actually see that part of ourselves fully. But I think it maybe goes even further than this, beyond just body and mind. We also might feel as though, for a lack of better way to describe it, we can't see our own soul, our spirit or our essence. We try on different identities or personality markers to try to express this unique part of ourselves. Any of you who's ever spent time with a middle schooler or a young teenager knows what this process of trying on identities look like. Maybe it's a very graceful process for some. For others of us, it was terribly comical. But even as adults, we do it. We just become a little more adept at navigating the trying on of identities. It's the way we try to craft the Christmas card and the Facebook profile. It's the way we dress or choose not to focus on the way we dress. It's in the hobbies we choose or the interests we cultivate as a way of showing the world something about us. The person who's at home pickling foods or making their own pottery, they're asserting something about how they want the world to understand them. As is the person who's working on their Harley each weekend and is a proud member of their bowling team, or the person who's really into opera and bird watching, or the strange guy who writes musicals and is really into puppets as an adult. The point is, we are all trying on these identities. And they are interests that we have, but at the same time, we're trying to package something deeper about us so that we can show it to the world. We want other people to know who we are, what we're about. that we're interesting, or that we're clever, that we're kind, that we're creative, that we're really unique. Yeah, there is that part of us, but then there's also the performance of that part of us. And why would we perform this for other people? Well, my guess is that we perform it because we want to have it reflected back to us that that is the kind of person we are. We want to be able to see that thing about ourselves. And yet, of course, paradoxically, it's the people who know us best that we don't have to perform it for. The people who see our most authentic selves are the ones we're around when we're too tired or broken to perform at all. What a funny predicament to be in, right? Here we are, these embodied beings who walk through the world trying to understand ourselves, and yet we need other people to tell us what's happening inside our bodies, to tell us how to navigate our minds, to tell us who they see us as, because sometimes we simply can't see ourselves. Now, I imagine there may be some of you out there who are not buying this. You're thinking, I don't need other people to tell me who I am. That's a problem you insecure people have. Or maybe you're thinking, maybe you, Tamarra, as an extrovert, you need other people to tell you who you are, but I am fine at home all by myself. And yet I want you to really think about your life. If there's ever been a moment that you felt like someone actually got you, a moment where you felt truly seen, maybe it's your partner or spouse who sees all of your flaws day in and day out and chooses you anyway. Or maybe it's the close friend who watched you make that huge mistake and then listened and sympathized and didn't judge you for it. Or maybe it's your own adult child who grew up and said, despite all the hard stuff, now that I'm a parent, I can finally see how hard you tried. Thanks. Or maybe it was just a random conversation with a stranger, someone you met on a bus or at a late-night diner. And in that conversation, you felt like there was this inexplicable soul connection, like they really saw who you were. Or maybe it wasn't a person at all. Maybe it was your dog, who every day is so freaking happy to see you when you get home. No matter how crappy you're feeling, the love they give you makes you feel a little bit better. Well, if you've ever had that kind of moment of witness, you know how good it can feel. How much we all long to be seen. How much we all long to hear that we are okay, that we're lovable, that deep down, we're good. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the baptism story. So here I was at 31 years old, and I was finally going to be baptized. I was on the Judson Memorial Church annual retreat, which happens on the fall equinox, much like our wedding several years later. That chilly autumn Sunday morning at sunrise, yes, it was also a sunrise ceremony. You can see I have a thing. I forced a bunch of people out of bed to attend this ritual. So a group of members of the church and friends rolled out of their sleeping bags while the sun was still in her bed, and they tromped down to a misty field beside a little pond where they formed a circle. And then as the sky brightened, I knelt at the center of the circle, and my pastor poured ice-cold pitchers of pond water over my head, saying, I baptize you, Tamarra, in the name of the Creator. Whoosh, huge pitcher of water. The created, whoosh, another pitcher of water. And the Spirit that binds them, one last giant, cold pitcher of water. And each time the water hit my head and neck and shoulders, I gasped because the water was really, really cold. But there was also something else happening. I felt like in that moment I was being awakened to a new part of my life. Like I was being awakened into Christian community. Like I was being awakened more fully into the God that loved me. After the last pitcher had been poured, my sweet ordination mentor, Reverend Ed Powers, who's in his 80s, stepped forward to wrap me in a thick wool blanket. We were both sobbing uncontrollably. And then I joined the circle, and we all sang together. And then when we went around, one by one, anointing each other's foreheads with oil, and looking into each other's eyes, and letting each person know that they were a child of God and that they were beloved. So you see, whether for a baby or an elder, whether outside or in this peaceful sanctuary, whether with a few drops of water or dunked into a river or the ocean, whether by a minister or a dear friend, this is a ritual where we are blessed, not only by God's love, but by one another, promising to watch out for each other, promising to bear witness to each other, and to reflect back the sacredness that's in each of us. It's not like God loved me any differently after I was baptized. It's not like there had been some quantifiable transformation. It wasn't even actually about the baptism at all. It was simply a symbolic ritual. But in that moment of my life, surrounded by that community, I was able to see something about myself, about my own sacredness, that I hadn't been able to see alone. In today's text, we're in the Gospel of Matthew. So just to put it into context, 2 chapters before we have Mary and Joseph fleeing from Herod to Egypt, and then 1 chapter before we're introduced to John the Baptist. And then the very next passage, Jesus shows up as an adult man. We don't get to know anything about what happened between when he was a baby fleeing to Egypt and when he shows up as an adult in the Matthew version. So at this point, Jesus' ministry isn't really underway. All we have is these predictions about who he will be one day. But in our passage, he goes to see his cousin John, this strange prophet living in the wilderness, eating bugs and dunking people into a river. Jesus goes to see him and asks if he will baptize him. In our text, John is understandably a little nervous. Just a few sentences before the passage for today, John describes Jesus as one who is greater than him, one whose sandals he is not even fit to tie. And yet here is Jesus asking John for this strange blessing. And John agrees, and he submerges Jesus below the water. And then we're told that as Jesus emerges, the heavens part, and he is told that he is God's child, in whom God is well pleased. There are undoubtedly lots of ways to interpret this text, but the way that I read it is that before Jesus could go into the wilderness and spend 40 days and nights alone meditating and battling his inner demons, before he could go out into the world and heal others, before he could walk on water or turn water into wine, before he could stand up to the powerful religious establishment, before he could travel the region advocating for the marginalized and the dispossessed, before any of that, Jesus needed to connect with someone who saw his potential, and Jesus needed to know that he was loved. The way I read this is that even Jesus needed help revealing his sacredness, not to the world, but to himself. And I think each of us is probably the same way. We walk around in many ways blind to ourselves. Without outside help, we can't really understand the inner workings of our bodies. We can't really control the minds that we have riding around in our heads. We can't even understand what our soul looks like. So we hope to have it mirrored back to us. We hope for something that will affirm that we are, in fact, lovable. So as you leave this place today, remember that just as Jesus was sacred, so is each and every one of you. And while the clouds might not literally part and a voice might not speak through the heavens, we are, each of us, a child of God in whom God is well pleased. But we might need each other as mirrors before we can actually see it. So go out from this space and be vulnerable. Tell the people you love how sacred you think they are. Show the people you love those tender parts of yourself. Because in order to go out into the world, in order to do the work of justice, the work of peace, the work of creating God's kingdom here on earth, we each first need to know that we are loved.